Hi, welcome to my channel. Today I've decided to do a bit of an instructional video on archery equipment, on specifically my hunting equipment. So it's going to be a little bit elementary for some of the experienced hunters, so bear with me on that. I may have a few things that the experienced hunters may want to pick up on as well. Let me start by saying if you're going to get invested in a bow and start spending that kind of money, get a good hard case to protect your investment. I recommend getting an SKB case. They're really strong, great for travel, and I protect my bows no matter what I've done to them. So I would recommend them. Now this is the bow that I currently shoot, the Mathews V3. Does that mean that this is the right bow for you? Maybe, maybe not. The right bow for you is a bow that you like the feel of, that you can shoot very accurately with, that you think fits you. So the right bow for you is the one that you like. So if you're going to get into the sport, I would go down to a bow shop. I would shoot everything they have them set at your draw length, have them set it at your draw weight that's comfortable for you, so that you can get a real feel for each bow instead of just fighting with them, and get an idea of what you really want. Even though you can spend $1,000 or $2,000 on a bow these days, you don't really need to if you're just getting into the sport to have a great shooting bow. For those who have been shooting for, say, 20 plus years and have shot the older bows, even the compounds, the best they had back then, a $400 or there-ish bow today with current technology is much more advanced, easier to shoot, much better than an older bow. It's like the difference between a Yugo and a Cadillac. When you have the technology, it's just so much better. Even though the components cost more back 20 plus years ago in a bow, it would not shoot as good as today's cheaper bows. The technology is just night and day. For example, probably one of the better technologies in a compound bow today are the parallel limb bows, like I have here. And in 2006, Mathews came out with the Switchback XT that had the first parallel limb bow, real limbs that were parallel. And I don't think they realized what they had at the time, because almost every bow today, every modern compound has parallel limbs. Now when you go shopping for a bow, you're going to, if you want to do some research, you're going to find the specs on a bow. You're going to find the IBO speed, the ATA, the brace height, the let-off riser height, etc. Don't let all that confuse you or scare you or worry you. I will give a little bit of a synopsis on what those things mean, but again, the bow you want is the one that you can shoot straight, that feels comfortable to you. My brother, for example, he shoots an older Hoyt Spider, and he shoots it dead nuts every time. He loves it. It is the bow for him, and it's what he'll probably always shoot. If you're new to the sport, shooting a bow is all about doing the same thing over and over and getting repeatable results that are accurate. I should point out that because my bow is a very short parallel limb bow, it's a V327, that the case for these type of bows is much smaller. But when I bought this bow this last year, couldn't find a smaller case, and I had to have it protected right away, so I got a bigger case, and I made do with some pool noodles, so they were just fine. Okay, very briefly, I'm going to go over specs and kind of what they mean. You always hear people talk about IBO arrow speed. IBO speed is measured by shooting a bow with an 80-pound draw weight, maximized draw length, and a 400 grade arrow, so they can kind of give you an idea to compare bows. Now, bow speed is important because it helps you be more accurate. We'll get into that in a little bit later, but really quick, ATA stands for axle to axle. That's the length from one axle to the other axle. Why that matters is because a bow with a longer axle to axle length is easier to be more accurate with. Now a riser is this part of the bow here, and its length, rather, the longer it is, the more easy it is to be accurate with your shooting. A bow's let-off is when you have the string all the way pulled back, it has a spot where it's just easy to hold, and it's a percentage of the total weight you pull back is gone. In other words, this bow has an 85% let off. That means when I pull it back 100% of the string's power, I'm only holding 15% of that. Another spec you'll hear a lot about is the brace height. The brace height is the distance between the string and the throat of the bow, or the furthest distance in the handle from the string. Now, a short brace height will give you faster arrow speed. You can also whack yourself in the arm with one that's too short. A lot of recurve shooters have to wear arm guards because of that. They whack themselves, it hurts pretty good. A longer brace height means that you're going to lose arrow speed, but it also means it's easier to shoot better. It's more forgiving is the word they use. In other words, if you pull a string back a long ways, it's easy to move it a little bit and be off a long ways. If you're only pulling it back a little ways, it's harder to mess it up. Other notable components of a bow, I should just mention the components. You have your cams, which are the two wheels on the ends. You have your limbs, you have your riser, your string, your cables, your rest, your sight. I like to use a wrist sling, a stabilizer, and there are little stabilizers throughout this bow as well. You also have a quiver mount on the other side. And these little things on the string are called monkey tails. They're just Matthew's version of a string silencer. You also, in today's bows, want to get a string put on for your release to click onto, like so. Now let's talk a little bit about these components. The cams on a bow are what give you the let off at the back of the bow so you can hold it for a long period of time. Now, every manufacturer does their cams differently. Some have adjustments you can make on them, some have to be switched out, some have modules, but everybody has their own patent and their own way of doing it, and each bow has a different feel to it. This bow, for example, is easy to pull back, and then it gets more difficult, and then it gets easy again. Other cams will be the opposite. Some just come straight back at the same tension very smoothly. This is called the draw cycle. People love a very smooth draw cycle because that makes it easy to shoot, but at the same time it can affect your let off and other things, speed of the bow, etc. I should mention that all these parts together, all the parts of your bow and the way they shoot, is referred to as the bow's platform. These are the limbs, of course. Their purpose is to shoot the string, basically. These are parallel limbs, like I had mentioned previously, and the cool thing about parallel limbs being this recent invention, so to speak, the way that they're done and the reason they're done is because it used to be when you shot a bow, especially a recurve or stick bow or traditional archery as they call it, the limbs are out kind of this at an angle, and when you release the string they kick forward, and when they do that the bow can jump out of your hand, and it has a vibration and a kick to it, and that can affect your accuracy. The new parallel limbs, however, actually spring against each other. This cancels out a lot of the shot and vibration and jump. In fact, with my bow, I can hold it in my hand with my hand open and shoot it, and it does not jump out of my hand or move. It's completely dead in the hand. Now, I had mentioned before that the longer axle you have and the longer your riser are, the more forgiving and easier to be accurate with the bow. You may notice that this is a 27-inch riser. That is insanely short, very insanely short. You may also know that the axle to axle, the ATA rating on my bow, is also 27. Now, normally on a bow with a riser this size, your axle to axle length would be about 30 inches. And what Matthews has done on this particular model is they have done a beyond parallel limb design, where the cams are actually pulled in a bit more. They're not just parallel. You may ask yourself, why would I want such a short bow and sacrifice forgiving shots and accuracy? Well, due to the design of this bow, where the riser would be a bow's for a 30-inch bow normally, and I have it on a 27, because of the axle to axle being brought in, the riser shoots on this bow as if it was a much taller bow. It's much more forgiving, much more accurate, in a small package. Now the reason it's in a small package and that I like it being in a small package is because I tree stand hunt and I blind hunt. And when you're crawling through the trees and such, a smaller bow is so much easier to not damage, get caught, and to shoot without hitting anything. So for me, this is my bow. Now I should mention, the shorter the bow, the less you can pull the string back. A person that has a draw length of say 30 inches can't shoot this bow. They would need to go with a larger bow. But since my draw length is only 27.5, this bow is perfect for me, and it's ideal for the tree stand or blind hunting that I like to do. And I don't have to sacrifice accuracy to do that. Another thing I should mention is how quiet this bow is. Now I have the Creed that I used to shoot still right here, and it is a whisper quiet bow. It shoots around 80 decibels, which is super quiet. But my V3 shoots around 76, and I think that might be the quietest bow out there actually. Now you might ask yourself, why would how quiet your bow be matter that much? Well, if you saw my Fish Lake video where I shot the deer there, the doe that was standing right next to that buck never knew where I was at. In fact, she was so nosy, she came back later and poked around and looked around trying to find what happened. Never saw me because they didn't hear my bow. So it helps you to get a second shot. It can help you to not have to chase your deer as far, because if a deer doesn't know what happened or where it came from, he doesn't know where to run. And so he's not as apt to go as far. And jumping a deer a mile and having to drag it back that far or find it in the dark with a blood trail that distance is no fun. Now, I don't know about other manufacturers because I haven't tried or looked, but with Mathews, you can build your bow on their website. In other words, you can pick your riser, you can pick your limbs, you can pick your strings, cables, colors, whatever you want to do. And it will show you your built bow. So you can see how it's going to look as a finished product. And then you can just print that out, take it down to a bow shop and say, this is what I want. Now you may say, why would I want to go to a bow shop? Why don't I just order it online? Well, there's several reasons why you want to get it from a bow shop. First of all, Mathews has a one free get out of jail policy, where if you destroy your bow, they will fix it for free if you're the original owner one time. Point in fact, my dad was trying to mess with his bow in his garage, didn't have an arrow in it, and he pulled it back and accidentally released it. He dug the cams out of the drywall, picked up the pieces of the limbs, put it all together in a bag, took it down to the shop he had got it from, and through Mathews they replaced it for free. So I don't know about other manufacturers' policy, but that's what Mathews has. Now let's talk a little bit about bow rests. A rest is the part of the bow where the arrow sits or rests, like so. Okay, now a lot of hunters like to get what's called a drop-away rest. A drop-away rest is basically a cage where you put the arrow through and it can move around in there, which I don't like it rattling around in there. But when you draw the string back, it lifts a Y, supports the arrow. Now when you release the string to shoot, it drops down and the arrow is suspended in midair to shoot. Now they like this because you have no drag. It's not dragging on a rest surface and it's not slowing the arrow down at all. And some guys feel that it's more accurate. Again, I set up my bow to hunt. And to hunt, I prefer a whisker biscuit. And this is a rest that is made out of little whiskers, little brush, little round brush. I don't really think it drags on the arrow that much because I've shot it and never had a trouble with an arrow speed or anything. And I like it the best because if I'm climbing a tree or hiking around or even shooting straight down out of a tree like I have done before, this rest holds it in position the whole time until I pull back. And it's been a flawlessly accurate rest. One other thing I'm going to mention is the roller guard here on the cables for the cams. In the past they used to use a bar, a slider that the cables would slide on. Now they kind of use rollers. The unique thing about this bow is it's the first bow where they come out and they put this roller guard right in the center of the strings so that the cam timing is usually perfect without having to mess with it. And even better, if you look at it, the purpose of the cable guard is to pull the cables away from where the arrow is going to be so that you don't hit with your fletchings. And it only makes sense to put that guard there because that gives you the most clearance for your fletchings to be right where the arrow is. Now on this bow, I may have mentioned I shoot it open-handed. I will grab the handle to pull it back, but then I will shoot open-handed, and it will not jump out of my hand due to the parallel limb technology, etc. However, I do put a stabilizer on, not necessarily because it needs to be more stable, but because, well, it looks cool, right? And I really like it because if I'm setting my bow down on the ground, I have something for the ground to impact rather than my sight. And a sight is a very delicate thing. In fact, let's talk about sights. This sight is a Trophy Ridge React vertical 5-pin sight. Now, I know you may not know what that is, but if you do, great. But what this sight is it's made up of 5 vertical pins that give you yardages. 20 yards, 30 yards, 40 yards, 50 yards, and 60 yards on this one. Sights on most other bows have horizontal pins. In other words, the pins come from the side over. They have an arm that comes this rather than being in line. I don't like those sights because part of your view is obstructed of your target. And with the vertical pins, you can see on both sides of the pin to see if you're right where the vitals are on the animal and you're going to hit well. So it helps you to see better. That's why I like them. Now this is a Trophy Ridge React sight, and what that means is, let me go back in time a minute. Back in the day when you sighted in a bow, you would have the pins. They would usually be metal pins in the reticle, and they would come from the side, and they would have sliding slots, and they would be adjusted with an Allen wrench because they were Allen screws. To sight in a sight, you would have to go somewhere where you could shoot, say, 60 yards without obstructions. You would have to take and you would have to adjust the sight reticle and the 20-yard pin sight one little crank at a time, adjust it until you got 20 yards right on. Then you would have to move back, mark your yardage at 30 yards, and you'd have to do the same thing for the 30 and the 40 and the 50 and the 60, and it would take you literally all day to sight in your bow. And because you're sighting each pin individually up and down and left and right, some of them may have been shooting okay, but they were off a little bit one way or the other. The React sight I have is completely different. The way it works is it has hand adjusting knobs, and you will actually sight in your 20-yard pin normally, and then you will sight in your 30-yard pin, and they all work on a gear system where once you have the 20 and the 30 sighted in, mathematically all the others are moving together with it, and they have found what your arrow will do for 40, 50, 60 yards automatically. You're done, and they're exact. That's why I love this sight. If you're into archery, you've been thinking this whole time, what is with that handle, right? Okay, well, I'll tell you, I've never found a handle on a bow that I like, never. Especially when I'm shooting 3D shoots, 20, 30 shots at a time. They're always super thin, and they always hurt my hand after a while. And so I found a company that makes a grip system called Forma Grip out of epoxy. And they'll sell you this epoxy, and you can mix the two parts, and you can put it around the handle of the bow, and you can squeeze it with your hand in the manner you're going to shoot very lightly. Just give it some marks, and then let it dry. And then you can sand it to perfection. And I will tell you, there is no grip out there that you can buy that will fit you as well as your own hand. Now you notice that I have a color on this grip. The neat thing about this epoxy is that you can mix color into it and make it that color, or you can paint it after the fact. Just remember to clear coat it with a satin or non-shiny finish. Also, if you're worried about selling your bow or trading it in the future with this handle on it, what you do is you put on some painter's tape around the original handle, and then you put the epoxy on, and when you don't want it, you take a Dremel and you cut it off like a cast, remove the tape, and you're just brand new, just like you were. Let's talk a little bit about bow releases, because there are more different kinds of bow releases than there are bows, and everybody likes their own little thing. This one that I shoot right here is a wrist release, which goes on your wrist, just like so. And it has a trigger, as you notice, similar to a gun, and it is on a spring. The way that it works is you go and put it on your string loop, you pull your bow back, and when you're ready to shoot, you shoot it just like a gun. Now there are releases that you hold in your hand that are the shape of your hand. I'm getting to where I can't hold on to things like I used to. I like using the wrist release because I'm not pulling back with my hand, I'm pulling back with my arm, and when I'm ready to shoot, I'm ready to shoot. I don't have to depend on my fingers to hold on to everything. One of the things that affects your shooting is your grip. I have found that with my grip, if you grip anything, and once you grab your hand tight around it, you can turn left or right a little bit when you're shooting, and that will throw your shot off. So I will grip my hand around it when I pull the bow back. But when I'm shoot, I will open my hand with this particular bow because it does not jump, and I will let the bow do the work, and it will always be more accurate than me. I also use a wrist sling just in case I drop it, and I don't want to drop a grand out of a tree if I don't have to. My older bow, my Matthews Creed, actually has the smoothest draw cycle I've ever seen. It is the same from start to finish. It is just smooth the whole way. This is a great bow, but when you get to a bow's back wall, which is when you have the string drawn back all the way and it's nice and solid, there's supposed to be a little rest valley there where you can relax and hold the bow back for a long period of time, which allows you to have time for the deer to do what he's going to do and finally give you the shot. It was hard to do that with recurve bows because you're holding the whole weight of the bow back the whole time. Now, this bow, I love this bow, how smooth it is, but the back wall on this bow, if you relax just a little too much, it immediately engages the string and it will pull your arm out of your socket if you're not ready. So I love this bow, but it was worth getting another one for me, and I'm not going to get rid of this bow because it's a good spare bow. It never hurts to have a spare bow, and I'll tell you, this last hunt, my dad was getting in the tree stand and broke the sight off his bow on a limb. This is the bow he had to shoot the next day because I had a spare. So it never hurts to have a spare. You have to remember that these things are under an incredible amount of tension. They're very delicate, they're very expensive instruments, and you can be shooting off and never even know why. It's good to have a backup if you can. And speaking of extra bows, there's nothing wrong with this bow. I've proven that you can drop it 25 feet out of a tree stand and then shoot a deer through the heart moments afterward. So I have nothing bad to say about it, but I like my other bow better. Let's talk a little bit about arrows real quick. On your basic arrow, you have a nock, you have fletchings, you have an insert, and you have, well, either a broadhead or a field point, as I have a field point in this case. Field points are for target practice, broadheads are for hunting. The way I like to do my arrows is with the nock so that the one odd arrow is up. That way I don't have to even look at my arrow to know which way to put it on the string if I'm got a big deer in front of me and I'm not thinking correctly. Most bow shops are eager to fletch your arrows for you and get them all ready for you. I prefer to do my own simply because I use an Arizona Easy Fletch tool, which is this right here. You open it up, you put your arrow in with your odd color to go there and your other colors here, so forth. And when you put the cap on, like so, and then you put the spring pressure on it with the glue on the fletchings, hang it upside down for about 15 minutes or so, and you're done. Now the reason that I do this rather than having the bow shop fletch them for me is that I take this Easy Fletch out in the field with me, and if I have an arrow get shaved or broken off on the fletch, I can just trim that one off. I can put it back in this Arizona Easy Fletch. I can glue it in the same position as all these were with this jig, if you will. I can do it in the field and I can be done in a hurry, and it will match my other arrows and it will fly like my other arrows. Now let's talk about a touchy subject. We're going to talk about broadheads for a minute. Everybody likes their own broadhead, and there's a million types out there. There are basically two general types. There are fixed heads and there are expandable or mechanical broadheads. Basically, a fixed head is one solid head made of components or one piece. An expandable broadhead is one that is compact, and when it engages the target, it opens up. Now, there are pros and cons to both. When it comes to a fixed head blade, fixed head blades usually have better penetration, And in fact, if I was to hunt wild pigs or buffalo or something with a 1/2 inch hide, I would shoot a fixed head, a smaller fixed head, to get the penetration necessary. Now, I only hunt deer and elk. For me, I chose an expandable or mechanical broadhead. Now, I'm going to say this up front, most mechanical broadheads are crap. They just are. They're not built very well. They're really wide to cut, but that means they lose penetration and break blades and have all sorts of problems. I found one that doesn't have problems, that I absolutely love. It is this one here. It is made by Interlock. It's an EXP or Sullivan type expandable broadhead. Now, what makes this broadhead unique from other expandable broadheads is the way that the blades work. A lot of broadheads have O-rings, rubber bands, retention clips, something to keep these blades in place in flight. This one does not. This one has nothing but a pin in it that will cam open and shut. It cams to lock. There is no messing with pins or springs or O-rings or garbage. They stay shut in flight when they leave the bow until they contact the animal, so nothing can fly open on the way and send your arrow off somewhere wrong. Now, a lot of guys are die-hard when it comes to using fixed heads, and they worry about penetration and such. I, on my last 2 deer, for example, shot straight through the heart of the animal and in and out shot, a pass-through shot. So I had great penetration. If you'd look at my last video where I shot that deer, the arrow came out the rear shoulder of that deer. In fact, the deer had turned his head when I shot. You couldn't see it because my bow was in the way. He had turned his head when I shot, and one of the blades hit his neck, engaged, and cut 2 inches open, his neck open 2 inches. Then it hit his chest. Then it went through the heart and obliterated the heart. I never found anything but pieces. And then it went out the back shoulder, completely through the deer. So there's no lack of penetration with these broadheads. The nice thing about it is, if you noticed when I picked up my arrow as well, all 3 of these blades were still deployed and locked in place. If you damage one of these blades, and they're thicker than other mechanical broadhead blades, I've never broken one, but if you scratch one up on a rock or what have you, all you have to do is take their little tool, punch the pin out, put in a new blade, punch the pin back in, you're done. So they're very reusable. I like these because they fly like a field point. Everybody wants their broadhead to fly like a field point with perfect accuracy, but these are the closest I found to a field point in the way that they fly. You're looking at about $38 for 3 of them if you can find them. And I shoot 100 grain. A lot of guys like to shoot 125. Truth is, I may shoot a 125 if it were not for the fact that I shoot 100 grain field points. And my broadheads are 100 grain. What that means is, when I get out to go shoot, I don't have to mess with my sights because my arrow's not going to drop. It's going to fly the same as a field point. Now, why does that matter? Well, a lot of times, if you're like me, you have a heck of a time getting off work. You got to get all your crap out of your truck. You got to get all your gear found and gone through and loaded in your vehicle. And then you got to drive. And by the time you get there, it's the middle of the night and the hunt starts in the morning. And you have to know that your arrows are going to hit the target. And these will. In fact, I go to deer camp if I'm able to get there in the daylight, and I'll shoot 1 arrow just to make sure my sight and rest have not been bumped. And it'll shoot dead on, and I'll be done. And I'll know that all the other arrows that I have are going to shoot exactly like it. Now, in contrast with others I've been with, it's more like a circus act with these fixed head guys. They pull out these fixed heads and they shoot, and they're all over the place. And they pick 4 or 5 that shoot really good and say, okay, these are my first arrows to shoot. I don't even think about it. I just know mine are all going to shoot good, and I don't have to worry about it. Whether I even practice or not, I can usually count on them being really accurate the first morning when I get in my tree if I haven't even shot them. And for me, I'm a plug-and-play guy, no messing around. Simpler is better. One other thing about mechanical broadheads is when they're in the closed position, they can't cut you. They're very safe. Fixed head has always got the blade exposed. These are dangerous for several reasons. First of all, to throw Dad under the bus again, he had to super glue his hand back together up on the mountain because there's no emergency services when he cut himself on one of them. And it's so easy to cut your string on your bow, which is under an incredible amount of tension all the time, and they're very dangerous. So I really prefer these. Let's go over some other gear real quick. Let's start with the laser rangefinder. I shoot a Leupold RX full draw 4, but today's rangefinders are just night and day from those of the past 20 years plus. They used to be like binoculars, massive heavy things, and now they have so many features. They're so much better and so much more compact. I purchased this one because it has unique features in that it has active ranging, which means rather than just aiming at your target, pushing the button and getting a reading on the yardage, you can actually hold it down and just get continuous readings, which is really cool. And another thing is, this particular model has built-in features for bow hunters. Now, if you ever watched old videos of bow hunters or riflemen that have a white paper taped to their gun stock or on their wrist, what those are is those are for yardages. Now, you can use a laser rangefinder to give you a yardage, but the thing to remember is gravity acts differently at different inclines. So the way it affects your bullets or your arrows. Now, if you were to say find a deer and he is down off of a cliff and you're shooting straight down, you ranged him directly at 60 yards, okay, and you were to use your 60-yard pin, you will miss that deer by a mile. The reason is because of the incline, your arrow speed is not going to be dropping down as if you were shooting vertical. It's, if you were shooting horizontally. If you're going vertically, it's just not dropping as fast. So you might even want to shoot a 20 pin at a 60-yard distance if the incline is straight down. And it's vice versa. If you're shooting up a hill and the deer was 60 and you shot 60, you'd probably shoot underneath it and miss it. So these new rangefinders have a built-in TBR or true ballistic range where they will take into account the angle, and they will say, well, the target you are shooting at is down to 45 degrees, so it's 40 yards away, so you're actually going to want to shoot your 30-yard pin, right? Well, no, it will tell you what to do automatically, so you don't have to use these charts on your arms or whatever. So it's revolutionary in that. This one has one more feature, which is the reason I bought it, where you can put in your arrow weight and speed and your information for that in here. It can punch it in, and it will know the arc your arrow is going to make before it reaches the target. Now, why is that important? Well, anyone who's ever shot a tree limb can tell you why that's important. Because because you're in a straight line with your target and you've shot straight at it doesn't mean that's the way your arrow is going to get there. It's going to fly up and then down. Now, the arc of your arrow could hit something. This rangefinder, if you put that information in, will give you a ceiling mark, which you'll know that between that ceiling mark and your target, if there's an obstruction, a limb or something, you could potentially hit that. And so it saves you from doing stupid things. So I really like the features in these. Now, there's a couple other items that I should mention that you're going to probably want to take when you bow hunt that I really found useful. First of all, rule number 1, don't pee in or near your tree stand or blind. Take something with you to make that possible, because deers have incredible noses, and so do elk, and they will smell you a mile away, and you pretty much told them to stay away from you if you do that. Another thing I like are these bow hangers or gear hangers that you can screw into a tree. You can put your bow together with the arrow in it, ready to shoot, hanging vertical, right there, ready to grab if something comes by, and you don't have to hold it all day. These are wonderful. I recommend taking with you some vinyl tape. This stuff marker tape is amazing. It saves you so much headache. If you hit a deer and you're trying to track it, blood trail, and it's taking quite a while and it's going for quite a ways, you mark where you last found blood with this. And if you get lost and you can't figure out where he went, you at least know where your last point was very easily, and you can start again. Or if you finally find the deer and it's in the middle of crap and you can't find your way back if you tried, you mark your way out like breadcrumbs with Hansel and Gretel, and you can find your way back to your deer. Another thing, if you're trying to find your tree stand at 3 a.m. in the dark, these are great to have something to follow. And one last thing, pack it in, pack it out. Don't leave them when you're done. If you're tree stand hunting, you need a way to get your bow in your tree. You can't hold it in your hand and climb up. It's dangerous and foolish. Don't do that. And so a lot of guys will get them something to pull the bow up with. Now, this is a straight string that I use, that I clip on my bow and pull it up and down with. A lot of people like to use these retractable cord hanging deals that retract the cord as you pull it up. I will never use those again, and I will tell you why. I was out at Fish Lake in the tree, and I was climbing up, and my dad was climbing up his, and I looked over the hillside, and here comes this nice 4-point buck in the middle of the day, totally unprepared. My bow's on the ground. So I got up there as quick as I could. I pulled the string to bring the bow up, and the retractable hanger decided it was not going to retract. So I ended up piling all my string onto my platform, got my bow in my hand, drew it back. Here comes the buck, textbook. And just as I'm about to shoot, this retractable hanger decides it's time to retract. And it sucked up all the line and banged around, and the deer, whoa, he went around, and I waited and waited, and I thought, okay, well, maybe he'll come back if I'm real quiet and I hold still. And in fact, he did. He came in a different route, but I could have gotten a shot. So I was drawn back again, and I was ready to get this deer this time. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this before, but there's a lot of hummingbirds out in the forest that you may not ever normally see or think that are there. But an arrow fletching looks an awful lot like a flower. And I was drawn back on this buck a second time when I got my tower buzzed by this hummingbird that scared me to death. And I about dropped my bow and fell out of the tree. And the deer saw me, and he was long gone. So beware of hummingbirds, and use a rope. Don't use one of those retractable lanyards. Now, really quick, I want to talk about when it's time to gut your deer, when you've got your animal and it's time to clean the kill. I actually use 4 types of knives. The first one I like to use is the Havalon surgical steel knife. It is like it says, it is surgical steel removable blades. It is so sharp, if you look at it wrong, it will probably cut you. I use this to start my initial cuts with through the skin and make the delicate cuts where they need to start. Then I move on to the gut hook. I use a Wyoming knife. The gut hook is this portion right here, and you don't ever want to cut the stomach of an animal because the acid and the smell will ruin your meat. And so a lot of guys will take the old traditional hunting knife and 2 fingers, and they'll try to cut up there as carefully as they can without doing that. With the gut hook, you don't have to worry about that. You just put it on, pull, it's protected. It doesn't cut anything, but the skin opens the deer up. That's my next thing to use. Then you come to the pelvic bone, which has the bladder underneath it. You do not want to get urine on your meat. That's not good either. And so in the olden days, Grandpa would take his regular old hunting knife and a rock, and he'd put it on the pelvic bone, and he'd bang on it and try and separate the bone to get the bladder out. This is not good for obvious reasons. You'd end up punching through and hitting the bladder if you're not careful. They sell cable saws. This is a really cool one. This one, you put it together as one piece, you feed it underneath the pelvic bone, then you pull back and forth as you lift, and it cuts right through the pelvic bone without damaging the bladder, and you don't get urine all over your meat. Now, when you get the guts ready to come out of a deer, one thing you have to do is you have to get up in the deer cavity, reach up in the cavity, and you have to hold the larynx, and you have to cut the throat out so that you can pull the rest of the entrails out. Now, for obvious reasons, you don't stick 2 hands inside of a deer where you can't see them with the surgical steel knife. So use the good old hunting knife for that. You're less likely to cut yourself. Last but not least, for skinning, I actually prefer the good old hunting knife because the Havalon's so sharp it ends up cutting into the meat and you have trouble separating the hide. This is dull enough that you can separate between the two very rapidly. Works really good. Go through my helpful hints list here real quick. See if I missed anything. Okay, if you're tree stand hunting, you'll get a tree stand or the steps with their built-in little straps, etc. I recommend putting a ratchet strap extra over everything. Don't trust what they are. It may pay off for you. You can trust me on that, especially if there gets to be wind in the tree. Another thing you're going to want is some way to secure yourself to the tree. They sell all these magnificent harnesses that will fall arresters that will keep you from falling out of your tree should you fall asleep. And let me tell you, if you get up in a tree stand at 4 a.m. and you've been driving all night before, it can really be easy to fall asleep in your tree stand. Now, if you're in a tree stand or a blind, take the time to take your bow and put it in positions where an animal could appear and pull it back and just take a look. Is my tree, is there a limb in the way? Is my arrow going to hit something even though I can see it with my sights? Is there a limb that my bow limbs are going to hit? Am I going to hit the flaps on my blind? Is my arrow going to tap a window? Know where you're aiming and what could happen before the animal shows up. That is the time to try and your shots, not when the animal's there. Tree stand and blind placement are much like real estate. It's all about location, location, location. Make sure that you're in an area where you know the deer can frequent or cross through, pinch points, water holes, etc. Don't just set it up anywhere, because that will determine your success a lot of the times. And I will say that sticking with your spot is smarter than moving around. If there are obviously no deer there for certain, you may want to do that. But if you're in an area where there are deer and you just haven't seen any, the second you move your stand or blind to somewhere else where you've seen the deer, the next day they'll appear where you were. I can promise you that. One other tip I can give you is shoot carefully, make a good shot, but do it as quickly as you can. Make sure you take advantage of the opportunities that come your way. Don't have any regrets. Point in case. I know that every one of you has drawn back on an animal or held a trigger on an animal, and you had a shot, but you waited just a little bit longer to see if you would take that one more step or come a little closer, and then something happened, got scared off, a doe spotted you, or he just didn't take that step and went somewhere else. Every one of you has a regret about that. And it's not like we're all hunting show hosts. We don't hunt every week. So just make sure that you take advantage of what opportunities you have, because if you're like me, you're lucky to hunt once every 3 years anymore to draw a tag. And if you see a deer or two, that may be all you see. And take advantage of your opportunities. Don't be too careful, too picky, too cautious, or you're going to be going home empty-handed and wait years and years to have another chance. Okay, another thing to mention when you're tree stand hunting or blind hunting is to check your shooting lanes. Make sure, oh, I didn't notice that little branch there, because that'll be the one that your arrow hits and goes off target. Make sure you clear a few little branches. Make sure that if you need to move, you move your stand a little or your blind a little bit to get the shots that could come from anywhere. Now there's another piece of gear I'm going to mention because I absolutely love it and I believe in it, and that is my leafy suit. And I'm not meaning a ghillie suit, but it's actually a leafy suit with cutouts, kind of like leaves. And they kind of move in the wind. I absolutely love this suit. I credit it for most of my kills and keeping me invisible, because I've had deer stare straight at me, and if I held still, they just wagged their tail and looked away and kept going. And the wind's blowing a little bit. When that happens, it makes you even more invisible. Just to have the leaves fluttering on you and the tree, the deer just ignores you like you do not exist. I love this suit. Some other advice I would offer would be do not use any single pin sights. They do make a single pin sight that has one pin and has an adjustment where you can adjust it to wherever the yardage is. I've had the 20, 30, 40, 50, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. I have the 5 pin sights with 20 to 60 yards, because when an animal walks through, I put the right one in the right place and I pull the trigger. Those that on the single pin sights have to range the animal and they have to go, okay, let's mess with this sight. I found that the deer don't like to wait for you to do that. Another piece of advice, throw dad under the bus again. Don't end up leaving your hunting license at home and have to go to the Richfield field office to try and print you out another one and ruin a day of your hunting. Make sure you have your license. Another thing to remember, if you happen to have your phone with you, even if you don't really have service, when that deer walks through, you're going to have service for some reason. Somebody's going to call or text you at that moment. It's just going to happen, and that's going to alert the deer. The same with your camera. Turn up your GoPro beat, turn off your light on your camera. Don't give the deer any indication where you're at. And if you get lucky to get a deer in an area where someone else in your party would like to hunt, don't gut them there. Whenever you're putting up a tree stand, preferably use an aspen. If you have to use a ponderosa, do, but try to avoid a pine tree unless you want to deal with horrible sappy mess. I would not advise hunting or stalking around cattle. Now, cattle aren't afraid of you. You can walk through a herd of cows, they don't care. A deer can walk through a herd of cows, deer and the cows don't care. But as soon as you start acting stealthy and put on your camo and creep around or get in a tree, the cows will freak out. And they don't just run away, they will stand there and moo at you for hours. Try not to hunt around cattle. Sheep are even worse. Since he's my favorite example, let's bring my dad up again. One of the biggest problems I've seen for people who shoot either 3D or who are hunting is this complex where they got to be macho and they got to turn their bow up higher to get faster arrow speeds. And we were out hunting at Fish Lake, me and Dad and the brothers, and we all set up our stands on this hillside, this draw, where we'd seen some good deer come through. And unbeknownst to us that night, our dad had turned up his bow so that he could have more poundage. Well, of course, it's a different story pulling the bow back in camp versus when a nice buck's coming underneath you and the buck fevers kick in. So we were all sitting up in our tree stands. We watched this nice 4-point buck come up the hillside, went right to Dad's stand, right up to his tree, and it mulled around and then it left. And we had to ask him at the end of the day, why did you not shoot that deer? And he couldn't pull his bow back. He had to sit down and watch it leave. So not only do I not crank my bow up too much, I actually crank it down a bit till it's absolutely as comfortable as I can get it. All I have is about 60 pounds on this bow. That's it. It does the job for shooting the deer. And if I shoot a 3D shoot, other guys I shoot with will shoot a round or two, and they will just get worse and worse and worse because they're getting tired. I will get better and better and better because I'm getting in the zone and I haven't killed myself by trying to pull back too much poundage.
Oh, one more thing before I forget.
Now, if you've made it to the end of this video through all this with me, I'm going to give you a little present that probably none of you know. I discovered this by accident. When you get in your tree stand in an aspen and you cut the leaves off up high to make your shooting lanes, etc., I found out that deer view aspen leaves as crack. They love them. I did a little research. Turns out, you're probably thinking, well, I've never seen deer eating aspen trees. Well, when the trees are young, within reach of the deer, they actually have very bitter leaves as a self-defense mechanism. When they get big, they get sweet when the deer can't reach them. And so I've learned if you take a pile of aspen leaves from up high in a tree and you put that pile right where you want the deer to stand for the perfect shot, I've seen deer come on a dead run, stop, and munch on that pile like they were starving to death, and then move on. And it will give you great shots. Also, in this time and day when we aren't allowed to use a trail cam while we hunt, if you don't know if you're even in a good spot that has deer, or and you can't put a camera up, you can stick a bunch of those leaves there, check it when you come back. If they're eaten on, you know you have animals in the vicinity. So hopefully this has been a good video for you. Thanks for coming along, and good hunting.